My name is Isabelle Miller, and at 25, I finally wore the graduation gown of UCLA, holding in my hands a degree in finance that had cost me nearly all of my youth to earn. But before you think I am a lucky girl, let me start from the beginning. Because the road that brought me here was anything but smooth, it was paved with cracks of favoritism, with unfair choices my parents imposed on my life. I was the eldest child, the one who was always expected to be strong, to grow up early, to carry the weight. When I first entered college, I thought I could finally live a life of my own. But in my second year, I was called into the living room, where my parents sat with stern faces. They told me the family could not afford to support two children in school at the same time. And in that so-called struggle, they made a choice to put all the money toward Claire, my younger sister by 3 years, who had always been their favorite, so she could study full-time, while I was forced to drop out. I still remember the feeling when my mother said, "Isabelle, you're stronger. You know how to manage on your own. Your sister doesn't. You'll understand." I sat there in silence, as if my future had just been stripped away the moment I barely had a chance to touch it. So I stepped into adulthood much earlier than my peers. I found a small job at an accounting office, then moved on to work as a bank assistant. Days were spent buried in spreadsheets, nights dragging myself back to a tiny rented apartment. Every month, aside from taking care of myself, I also sent money home to help my parents cover the mortgage, medical bills when they were sick, and even daily expenses whenever the household came up short. Meanwhile, Claire stayed in the safety of our parents' arms, going to school and enjoying life without ever having to worry about money. Many times I wanted to ask why, but I held back, because I knew the answer was always the same. She's younger, she needs it more. 6, 7 years slipped by like that, and I grew used to the role of the silent pillar, working, sending money, swallowing unfairness. Yet, deep inside me, the fire of an academic dream never went out. Once my job became stable, I decided to re-enroll, this time part-time. It was an exhausting journey. Working all day, rushing to class in the evening, coming home near midnight. I often studied with eyes half closed from fatigue. But semester after semester, class after class, I pushed through. And finally, at 25, my name was called on the graduation stage. That day should have been a radiant milestone. I had hoped my parents would be proud, that they would stand in the crowd clapping loudly. They did come, but only for a short while. As soon as the ceremony ended, while I was still caught in the arms of friends and colleagues congratulating me, my parents rushed off. They said they had something urgent to prepare. Claire's 22nd birthday party. I stood there, still holding the bouquet they had handed me out of courtesy, watching their figures fade into the crowd as a cold emptiness spread inside me. In that moment, I understood that to them, I was only the child who could take care of herself, while every joy, every favor would always belong entirely to my sister. And once again, I was left behind. After the graduation ceremony, I decided not to head straight back to my small apartment in Los Angeles but to stop by my parents' house. Partly because it had been a long time since I had really sat with them, partly because I wanted to feel, just once, what it was like to share my joy after such a long journey. The house was still the same, the 2-story suburban home with the white wooden fence I had paid to repair more than once, the roof tiles I had once hired a contractor to replace when they leaked. Stepping inside, the familiar scent of coffee and old wood lingered, making me feel both close and distant at the same time. My father, as usual, was buried in a mess of papers on the dining table. He was never good with paperwork, and for as long as I could remember, whenever there were complicated files or bank documents, I had always been the one to handle them. He looked up as I walked in and said, "Isabelle, if you have time, help me sort out these files. I don't understand any of this." I nodded lightly, saying nothing, and pulled out a chair to sit down. A part of me moved on autopilot because I had been doing this for years, a habit ingrained since my teenage days. I began to sort the documents into piles, one stack of mortgage receipts, another of insurance papers, another of unpaid taxes. Then, among the worn papers, a dark blue folder caught my eye. On the corner of the cover, bold letters read, "Estate Plan and Last Will and Testament." My heart skipped a beat. I had never seen this document in the house before, and curiosity surged through me. I hesitated for a moment, then reasoned with myself. I had been the one paying the mortgage, sending money for medical bills, pouring effort into keeping this house standing. I had the right to know what was written inside. I opened the folder. The first pages were basic information: my parents' names, the house address, the lawyer who drafted it. I flipped quickly, and my eyes froze at the section dividing assets. Just a few short lines cut into me like a knife. The entire house, the savings accounts, every remaining asset, everything was left to Claire. Each word stood sharp and cold, as though carved into stone. I searched for my name. It was there, but only in one short, indifferent sentence. The eldest daughter, Isabelle, is independent and requires no support. I was frozen. How had I been living all these years? Since I was 19, I had dropped out of school, gone to work, and sent every small paycheck home so my parents wouldn't lose this house. Every time my mother was in the hospital, I scrambled everywhere to cover the medical bills. Every time the pipes burst, I called the repairman and paid the entire cost. I thought I was helping to build and preserve the family home. Yet, in their eyes, I was nothing more than the child who is independent and requires no support. I gripped the paper tightly, my hands trembling. The question burst in my mind and slipped out of my mouth. All these years, who was the one paying the mortgage? Has Claire ever paid a single dollar? I was speaking to myself, but my voice rose loud enough to drown out the television in the living room. Anger swelled in my chest, spreading through my entire body. Memories came rushing back. Nights when I sat in the bank office until 10 o'clock, eating instant noodles instead of dinner so I could save more to send home. The day I buried my dream of college while Claire beamed, receiving the scholarship my parents had funded with the very money that should have been mine, and that graduation night, when my parents left early to prepare for Claire's birthday party. I sank into the chair, my eyes fixed on the lines of the will. A part of me hoped it was only a draft, a mistake. But each word seemed to whisper, "No, Isabelle, this is the truth." They made their choice. They always chose Claire, and this time was no different. Shame washed over me, the feeling that my whole life I had only been a caretaker, a laborer in my own family. All my efforts, all my sacrifices, erased with one cold, dismissive sentence. I took a deep breath, holding back the hot tears that threatened to fall. I refused to cry in front of these papers, refused to admit that I had just been struck with the deepest wound by the very people I called parents. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder in their faces, but in that moment, I sat still, shaking, letting the anger seep into every cell. Perhaps this was the moment I finally saw the true face of favoritism. No more excuses, no more denial. In their eyes, I was only a shadow standing behind Claire, only a resource to be drained, never the daughter who deserved protection or equal love. In the silent kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock echoed as I tightened my grip on the paper once more. This time, instead of pain, something else was swelling inside my chest. Determination. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain from this moment on: I would never allow myself to be taken advantage of again. When my father returned to the kitchen and saw my stiff expression, he frowned. "Why aren't you finished yet? Stopping halfway again?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I lifted the folder, my voice hoarse. "What is this, Dad? The entire house, every bit of savings, everything for Claire? And me, nothing but one cold line, does not require support." He flinched, his face paling for a split second before slipping back into that familiar mask of indifference. Clearing his throat, he tried to sound calm. "This is complicated, Isabelle. You don't understand." His words stung, as if I were still a child, too naive to grasp the truth spelled out in black and white. My chest rose and fell with anger as I glared at him. "Don't understand? I just read every word clearly. There's nothing complicated here. It's simple." Claire gets everything, and I get nothing. My voice echoed through the kitchen, drawing my mother in from the living room. When her eyes landed on the will in my hands, her gaze faltered for a moment before she quickly softened her tone. Isabelle, don't overreact. You have your degree, you're strong, you can take care of yourself. Claire is different. She's fragile, she needs protection. We just want to make sure she never has to struggle in the future. A bitter laugh escaped my throat, sharp and cracked. I lifted my head, locking eyes with her. Fragile? Claire is so fragile that at 23 she's never paid a single utility bill? So fragile, she's never contributed a single cent to the mortgage, while I've been working myself to the bone since I was 19? If that's fragility, then you're the ones who created it. You coddled her until she became someone who only knows how to demand. My father shifted uneasily, his hand slipping into his pocket, his tone hardening. Watch your mouth. We had our reasons. We did this for the good of the family. I snapped my head toward him, my eyes blazing. Family? A family only exists when everyone is treated fairly. What you've been doing all these years isn't family, it's spoiling one child and exploiting the other. At that moment, Claire appeared at the staircase, phone still in hand, her expression a mix of drowsiness and irritation. Her voice was syrupy, laced with annoyance. What's all the noise about? Isabelle, are you complaining again? You've got a job, a degree, you don't need anything. Why be jealous of me? I turned and looked straight at my sister. Years of bottled-up frustration erupted in a single moment. Jealous? You think I envy someone who lives off others, never worrying about a single day's food or bills? No, Claire. I'm furious because I sacrificed so much, only to be dismissed with one line in a will. Does not require support. While you, who have never carried a single burden, are handed everything. Claire rolled her eyes and shrugged. So what? Mom and Dad love me more. What's new? I'm the youngest. You're older, you can take care of yourself. She said it like it was a universal truth, as if justice itself meant the youngest deserves more love and privilege. My fists clenched, nails digging deep into my skin. No, Claire. Growing up doesn't mean carrying everything for everyone. Independence doesn't mean being erased from the family. If fairness means one child is spoiled while the other breaks their back without acknowledgement, then that's not family, it's injustice. My mother stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, her voice dripping with honey. Sweetheart, don't be so harsh. One day, when we're gone, you'll still have your career, your stable income. But your sister won't. You should think further ahead, put the family's interests first. I brushed her hand off, my gaze icy. Put the family's interests first? I've done that for 7 years. I dropped out of college to work, I sent home every paycheck to cover the mortgage, I sacrificed my youth to carry the load. And now, all I get in return is a note saying I don't need support. You want me to think ahead for the family? Then why have you never once thought ahead for me? The air thickened, as if the walls themselves were listening to every word. I stood tall, looking each of them in the eye, my parents, then Claire. Memories surged back, at 12 years old, forced to babysit, cook and clean, while Claire was free to play. When I wanted to go to summer camp, my parents said there was no money, but somehow there was money for Claire's ballet lessons. When I dreamed of studying finance from the start, they told me, "You're smart, you'll manage," while pouring every resource into Claire's education. Each memory pieced itself into one undeniable picture. This favoritism didn't begin with the will, it had been there my entire life. I drew a deep breath and released each word, sharp and final. If my name isn't in the will, then stop treating me like the family's wallet. From now on, I won't pay a single cent. Whoever inherits carries the weight. The living room fell silent. My father narrowed his eyes, my mother's mouth hung open, and Claire smirked with a mocking curl of her lips. My words sliced through like scissors, severing the invisible rope that had tied me to this house, to responsibilities I never chose. They stared at me in shock, but I no longer cared. I grabbed my bag, walked briskly to the door, and slammed it shut behind me. Driving back to my small apartment in Los Angeles, I felt as though I had just walked out of a storm. My hands were still trembling with anger, but my heart was beating in a different rhythm, one of release. I remembered all those nights after late shifts when I rushed to my parents' house to take them to the hospital. I remembered the phone ringing at midnight just to hear my mother say, "The utility bill is due, Isabelle." I remembered sitting in front of my laptop, typing numbers into the bank system, transferring a few $100s, and then sighing as I watched my own account shrink. All of it had become a default duty, something none of them ever thanked me for, something they saw as nothing more than what I owed. And now, I had let it go. That night, in my tiny apartment, for the first time in years, I sat by the window and looked at the city lights stretching across the horizon without calculating which bill I needed to send money for. No more urgent messages. No more sticky notes on my mother's fridge demanding, "Pay the water bill this week." No more heavy sighs from my father whenever the mortgage was due. The silence of the room was so deep it almost felt hollow, as if a dark void was waiting to swallow me. But only for a moment. Slowly, that emptiness gave way to relief, to a quiet peace I had long forgotten. The first day I didn't send money home, I could hardly believe myself. In my head, I still heard my mother's familiar voice. "Isabelle, you're the eldest, you have responsibilities." Or my father's reproach. "You're selfish, always thinking only of yourself." Those voices haunted me for so many years that even when I was alone, I still felt guilty for spending money on myself. But this time, when I opened my bank account and saw the balance untouched after paying rent and essentials, I smiled softly. For the first time, I knew what it felt like to use money for myself without waiting for a message demanding more. A week passed. My phone remained silent. I knew they were waiting, certain I was only sulking and would return to my duties. But I was no longer the Isabelle of the past. Every evening after work, I opened my books to study for professional certifications, or I simply spent time on myself reading, listening to music, even cooking a proper meal instead of rushing through takeout at the office. I realized I had lived like a shadow for far too long, and now, for the first time, I could finally see myself clearly. Of course, there were moments when my heart tightened. Passing by the grocery store, I would suddenly think, "I wonder if Mom has enough food." Or when a colleague mentioned their parents were celebrating an anniversary, I felt a pang, knowing my family had never done anything like that for me. But whenever that feeling rose, I remembered the will. I remembered the cold words, "Isabelle does not require support." And I reminded myself, they had chosen to erase me from the family's future, so I had the right to erase the unreasonable responsibilities they had forced onto me. The emptiness gradually turned into relief. I could feel my body no longer tense whenever my phone buzzed. I could feel my sleep grow deeper, no longer haunted by dangling bills. I could feel every breath lighten, no longer burdened by a house that, in the end, would never belong to me. And in that silence, I understood that my decision to stop wasn't betrayal of family, it was saving myself. I still remember that Saturday night. I sat alone on the balcony, holding a cup of hot tea, watching the city lights glitter. I whispered, almost like a vow to myself, "Isabelle, from now on, you live for you. No longer the wallet, no longer the shadow, no longer the substitute, just you." And with that promise, I knew my new journey, the journey of breaking free from toxic ties, had truly begun. 3 weeks after I left my parents' house, everything seemed to fall into a lull. I went to work, came home to my small apartment, cooked meals, read books, studied for professional certifications. The days were so calm that I began to think maybe my parents had understood, maybe they had accepted my choice. But I was too naive. On Monday morning, just as I set my coffee down on my desk at the bank, my phone buzzed. On the screen was a short message from my mother. "Mortgage due." That was it. No greeting, no asking how I was doing after graduation, no apology for everything that had happened. Just a cold, bare command, as if I was still the wallet they could reach into whenever they wanted. I stared at the words, a mix of bitter amusement and anger rising in my chest. After everything I had said, after my decision to leave, they still believed I would slip back into the same old role, paying as though nothing had changed. I typed out a reply, short but razor sharp. Let Claire handle it. The house is hers. I pressed send, then set my phone down and took a deep breath. That answer was like holding up a mirror to show them the truth. The one they trusted, pampered, and favored in the will was now the one who had to carry the real responsibility. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone began to ring nonstop. First, it was my mother, then my father, then even the house number. I watched the screen light up again and again, but I didn't answer. My hand trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because I knew if I picked up, I would be dragged back into the familiar cycle. My mother's guilt-ridden voice, my father's scolding accusations, Claire's smug disdain. I refused to fall into that trap again. I let the phone ring, fall silent, then ring again, until the battery was nearly drained. That evening, when I returned home, I opened my voicemail. My mother's shaky voice filled the room. Isabelle, you can't be this irresponsible. Our family needs you. You're the eldest, you have to help your sister and your parents. Then came my father's harsh, angry tone. What are you doing, Isabelle? Are you going to let us lose the house? After all the years we raised you, now it's your turn to show some respect. I listened, and all I felt was exhaustion. Not a single word acknowledged the 7 years I had carried the mortgage on my back. Not one hint of gratitude. Only demands, pressure, and blame. The next day, another message from my mother. Isabelle, at least send part of it. Claire is still studying, she has nothing. You'd really let your sister end up on the street? The words stung for a moment, but instantly, the image of the will came back to me. All assets go to Claire. I typed my reply. If the house belongs to Claire, then the mortgage is hers too. I hit send, and a small weight lifted from my chest. In the days that followed, my phone felt under siege. A text from my father. You're bringing shame to this family in front of our relatives. From my mother. People will say we failed as parents, raising a daughter like you. Even Claire joined in. You're such a disappointment. A few $1,000s is nothing to you. Why make it such a big deal with mom and dad? I read that and let out a bitter smile. Nothing. Spoken so casually by someone who had never worked a single day in her life, who had no idea how hard it was to earn money. I wanted to reply, if it's nothing, then you pay it yourself. But I deleted the words. They weren't worth it. I chose silence instead. I didn't answer calls, didn't send more replies, only read their messages to see how desperate they were becoming. I had learned that silence was my greatest power. In the past, just the sound of my mother's choked voice was enough to make me cave and transfer money. But now, I saw the truth clearly. They didn't see me as a person, only as an ATM. And an ATM doesn't need love, only to keep dispensing. I no longer wanted to be that machine. I knew the real battle was only beginning. They wouldn't stop easily, they would find new ways to push me back into the old role. But in that moment, as the night wind brushed against my face, I smiled. Because for the first time, I felt I was the one steering my life, not being controlled by the endless demands of a family ruled by favoritism and selfishness. Saturday night, after a long day at the bank, I was just about to make myself a cup of tea when my phone lit up again. I thought it would be the same old messages from my mother, mortgage due, or, the family needs your help. But this time, the screen showed Claire's name. I sighed, opened it, and of course, the words were dripping with sarcasm. You're so petty. Are you really that stingy over a few $1,000s? I read it again and again, my chest tightening, but the sharp sting I once felt was gone. Instead, I found it almost laughable. Claire, who had never worked a single day, never paid a bill, never known what it felt like to wait for payday just to cover rent, had the audacity to write something so weightless. I set my cup of tea down and slowly typed back. If it's so little, why don't you pay it? You're the one who inherited the house in the will, right? The homeowner pays the mortgage. Simple as that. I hit send, feeling a calmness that was strangely new. In the past, just a single reproach from my sister was enough to make me feel guilty, to scramble to make up for it. But now, each word I typed was like a blade, cutting through the rope of guilt that had bound me for so many years. Not even a minute later, Claire replied, "I'm still in school. I don't have money. You're the eldest, it's your responsibility. Mom and Dad are old, I'm still young, why can't you understand?" I actually laughed out loud. I thought about this responsibility she was talking about. At 19, I had to drop out of college and start working to keep this house afloat. Meanwhile, Claire was showered with money to study full-time, thrown birthday parties, ballet lessons, a new laptop every time she wanted one. For her, being young meant the right to be indulged. For me, being the eldest meant carrying an endless weight. I typed back again, short and cold. "You're young, but old enough to take responsibility. If Mom and Dad think you deserve the house, then you deserve the bills that come with it." I hit send, put the phone aside, and didn't care to check again. But my parents weren't ready to give up. That very night, message after message poured in. My mother: "Isabelle, you're so ungrateful. We raised you, and now you turn your back on the family." My father: "You're disgracing us. People will say we raised a daughter with no respect." I sat in my small apartment, reading every word, but strangely, I no longer felt suffocated. I thought back to my second year of college, when I was forced to quit so Claire could continue, and my mother said, "You're stronger, you know how to manage, but your sister can't." Back then, I believed her. I thought it was my duty. But now, after seeing those cold lines in the will, I understood completely. It had all been an emotional trap, designed so I would carry the weight willingly, so they could pamper Claire without ever facing the consequences. I put the phone down and asked myself, why for so many years was one simple phrase, "the family needs you," enough to make me sacrifice everything so easily? Maybe because I was afraid of being called selfish, afraid of being labeled ungrateful. But now that the truth stood so clear, words like ungrateful or disrespectful suddenly felt hollow. Because if it were truly family, that family would know how to value me, not erase me with a single line in a will. The next day, just after finishing my shift, I saw another flood of missed calls. My mother's message was shorter this time, but dripping with manipulation. "Do you want us to lose the house?" And, oh, I pressed my lips together, then typed back, "I don't want anything. I just believe the one who inherits the house should take care of it. That's fair." I hit send, then switched off my phone. My heart was calm, no longer storming like before. Claire, however, didn't give up. That evening, another text came. "You're so selfish. Mom and Dad gave you everything, and now you abandon them." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. I remembered exactly what everything meant to her. It was the youth I had thrown away to work. It was the paychecks I clenched my teeth and sent home. It was the nights I stayed awake arranging hospital bills for Mom. If that was everything, then yes, I gave it. But not as the recipient. The one who received it all was Claire. I didn't reply. I let the accusations slide across my screen untouched. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. Those guilt-ridden tactics, those words that had weighed on me for years, no longer had any power. They were like dull arrows, shot toward me, but unable to pierce the armor I had put on since the shock of the will. That night, when I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I realized I no longer trembled with guilt. I slept deeply, without dreams of scrambling to pay bills or hearing my mother's reproachful voice. And the next morning, when sunlight spilled through the window, I knew one thing with certainty: their game had changed. I was no longer a pawn on the family's chessboard. I had stepped away, and from now on, it was they who had to face the moves they had made. The next morning began like any other. I arrived at the bank earlier than usual, preparing files for an important client meeting. Sitting in my office, carefully reviewing each number, I felt a rare calm after weeks of being bombarded with calls and messages. I thought maybe, after seeing my silence, my family had finally begun to accept the truth. But I was wrong. Around 10 o'clock, my desk phone rang. The receptionist's cautious voice came through. "Miss Isabelle, there are people here who say they're your parents and your sister. They insist they need to see you right away. Should I let them up?" I froze for a few seconds, gripping the receiver tightly. They hadn't stopped at texts or calls. They had brought the fight to my workplace. My heart burned with shame as I imagined my colleagues witnessing my parents and Claire making a scene in the lobby. I took a deep breath and answered shortly. "Keep them there. I'll come down." Then I stood, my face cold as stone, and walked out of my office. When the elevator doors slid open, the sight hit me instantly familiar, yet gut-wrenching. My mother sat on a chair, eyes red, clutching a tissue. My father stood rigid, his face dark with anger. Claire leaned against a column, phone in hand, a smirk tugging at her lips. The whole scene looked like a rehearsed play, with each cast member in their role. The weeping victim, the stern enforcer, and the mocking spectator. My mother leapt up, grabbing my hand as tears streamed down her face. "Isabelle, you can't treat your family like this. Family is about supporting each other, don't you understand?" I stood still, letting her clutch my hand, but my voice cut through like steel. "Family? When I needed to study, you chose Claire. When I needed a chance to stand on my own, you said I didn't need it. When I carried the mortgage on my back for 7 years, did anyone thank me? Where was this family you're talking about all those years?" My father stepped closer, his voice low but heavy. "We only did it hoping you'd grow stronger, learn to sacrifice for your sister. You're the eldest, you should understand." I turned toward him, my eyes sharp as ice. "Sacrifice? I've sacrificed for 7 years. I dropped out of school, I worked, I sent every dollar I earned to keep this house standing. I gave up my youth for responsibilities that were never mine to bear. And now I'll ask you, was that sacrifice not enough? If sacrifice means becoming a bottomless wallet, then today I am done." The air stretched tight as a wire. Colleagues in the lobby were glancing over, whispers passing between them. I could feel the weight of their curiosity, but I didn't care. I had spent my whole life trying to please my parents. Now, all I wanted was to speak the truth out loud. Claire cleared her throat, scoffing, her voice dripping with disdain. "God, you're so dramatic. Do you really think you can abandon Mom and Dad? You'll help them eventually. You can't cut us off." Her words poured gasoline onto the fire already burning inside me. I turned, locking eyes with hers, my voice steady and sharp. "No, Claire, you're wrong. I have cut it off. You are the homeowner in the will. You're the one who inherited everything. And homeowners pay the mortgage. Simple as that." Claire fell silent, her eyes flickering for a moment before darting away, though the smirk still clung stubbornly to her lips. My father cut in, his voice sharp with resentment. "What you're saying is unfilial. We gave you food, clothes, a roof over your head, and now you turn your back on us." My hands clenched tight, and each word came out clear and deliberate. "Food and clothes you gave me? You took my tuition and handed it to Claire. You forced me to quit school so I could work and pay the debts. You didn't give me opportunities, you took them away. And when I still chose to carry the load, you wrote in the will that I require no support. And now you dare to call me unfilial." My mother's sobs grew louder, pulling even more eyes toward us. Through her tears, she choked out, "Isabelle, how can you say such cruel things? No matter what, we are blood." I exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze. "Blood? If blood mattered so much, why did you erase me from the will as though I were a stranger? Blood isn't an excuse to exploit one child while spoiling the other. If that's what family means, then I'd rather have none." The air grew so heavy I could hear the click of a passing colleague's heels on the marble floor. I knew people were watching, but strangely, I felt no shame anymore. Instead, I felt pride because at last, I was speaking the truth, instead of staying silent to protect the image of those who had never protected mine. At last, my father lowered his voice, delivering one final emotional blow. "Isabelle, do you really want us to lose the house? You'd let outsiders laugh at our family? I locked eyes with him, my voice steady and resolute. No, I don't want you to lose the house. I only want the person you trusted, the one you chose in the will, to take responsibility. I've carried enough. Now it's Claire's turn. A heavy silence settled over the lobby. My mother sniffled, my father's jaw clenched. Claire bit her lip but had no comeback. I stood tall, my back straight, my voice unwavering. In that moment, I knew I had reclaimed control of my life. No amount of tears, accusations, or mockery could shake me anymore. For the first time, I saw it with perfect clarity. I owed them nothing. If anyone was in debt, it was them in debt to me for the youth they stole, the fairness they denied, and the love they never gave. I turned my back and said firmly, "This conversation ends here. From now on, don't come to my workplace again. If you want to talk about the mortgage, talk to Claire. I have nothing to do with it." Then I walked away, leaving all three of them standing there under the stares of strangers. For the first time, I felt no guilt, only relief. Because the truth had finally been spoken, out loud, in front of everyone. After that day, when my parents and Claire barged into my office and tried to shame me in front of colleagues, I thought they would retreat, at least out of embarrassment. But I underestimated them. A few days later, while I was sitting in a cafe near my apartment preparing documents for a meeting, I casually opened Facebook. And right there, the familiar words from my mother's account struck me. "We raised our eldest daughter all these years, and when we needed her most, she turned her back on us. So ungrateful, so disrespectful. What parent should have to carry a mortgage alone in old age who could understand this pain?" Below her post was a photo of the house, taken from outside the gate, with a tearful caption. "This house raised our children, but now it has become a burden because one daughter has washed her hands of us." My chest tightened. Just a few lines, yet they painted me as a betrayer, a selfish daughter who abandoned her parents in their time of need. I scrolled down and saw dozens of comments from my parents' friends, old neighbors, even some relatives. Young people these days are so heartless. Better to have no children at all than children like that. Stay strong, she'll regret it one day. Each comment stabbed at me, not because they were true, but because they were so familiar. I had heard those very words from my parents before now they were broadcasting them to the world, turning me into a villain in the eyes of others. And it didn't stop there. The next day, another post appeared, this time from my father. A lifetime of parenting, only to be treated as a burden in the end. Instead of helping, our daughter chose abandonment. What is family if it includes a daughter like that? He even tagged me at the end, adding, "Hope you feel ashamed." I sat silently in my room, my stomach twisted. It hurt, of course it hurt, but I didn't collapse like I once would have. This time, the pain came with clarity. Scrolling further, I saw what I expected. Claire had added her part to the performance. On her page appeared a pastel-colored status. "Some people value money over family. It's heartbreaking to have a sister like that. I just hope mom and dad don't suffer anymore." Attached was a photo of Claire hugging my mother, both of them crying. To outsiders, I was now cast as the cold, greedy daughter, abandoning her aging parents and her poor, heartbroken sister to suffer alone. I sat in front of the screen, reading each line, feeling my chest tighten with pain. But then, I smiled, a bitter, yet powerful smile. If this had been the Isabelle of last year, I might have rushed back immediately, apologized, wired money, just to erase those accusations. But the Isabelle I had become was different. I knew the truth. I had seen it written plainly in the will. I understood that every effort I had poured into that family had been erased with a single line. "Does not require support." And most importantly, I realized I was no longer controlled by their guilt games. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the warm yellow light spilling across the wooden table, my laptop glowing in front of me. I stared at Facebook's blank post box, my fingers hovering over the keys. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to avoid more chaos. But another part, stronger, sharper, whispered, "If you stay silent, they'll keep telling their false story. They'll keep painting you as the villain, when the truth is the opposite." I drew a deep breath. Memories flashed across my mind, years of overtime shifts, mortgage payments I wired home, sleepless nights calculating hospital bills for my mother. I thought about how I had carried everything to keep that house standing, only to be written off as unnecessary. All those memories fused into a single resolve. This time, I would not stay silent. I opened the draft box and began to type. I rarely share family matters online, but it's time to tell the truth. My parents are calling me ungrateful because I stopped paying the mortgage, but what's the reality? Since I was 19, I was forced to drop out of school because they chose to funnel all resources to my younger sister, Claire. I worked nonstop for 7 years, sending money home every month to keep the house afloat. I covered medical bills, home repairs, and living expenses, while Claire never had to worry about a single thing. I paused, exhaled, and kept going. And after all of that, I discovered in the will that every asset, including the very house I helped preserve, was left to Claire. My name appeared only in one cold line. Isabelle does not require support. If I am truly ungrateful, then what were those 7 years of sacrifice? If I am selfish, then why did I give up my youth, only to be discarded in the end? My fingers struck the keys harder. I haven't abandoned my family. I've only refused to keep being an endless wallet. If the house belongs to Claire, then so do the bills. That is what fairness looks like. I will no longer be condemned by words like ungrateful or disrespectful. I know my worth, and I will not let anyone trample it again. I read it back, feeling each word lift like stones from my chest. Then I pressed post. In that moment, I knew a storm was about to break. There would be critics, there would be supporters. But at least, for the first time, my story was told in my voice, not in the twisted versions spun by my parents and Claire. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Outside, night had fallen, and the city lights still shimmered. Inside me, the pain remained, but it was accompanied by a strange calm. I had chosen to tell the truth, and from now on, I would never let others define me with their lies again. My post had barely gone up when, within an hour, it began to spread. I never imagined that the words I wrote in a night of anger and determination would travel so quickly. At first, it was just a few close friends and colleagues, the ones who had seen me working overtime, who had heard bits and pieces about me covering the mortgage for my parents. They left comments of support. "Isabelle, I know how much you've done, stay strong," or "You don't owe them anything. They have to take responsibility for their favoritism." By midday, the shares skyrocketed. I received messages from distant relatives who had only ever heard my parents' version of the story. They wrote, "We thought you really were ungrateful, but reading the truth, we see how much you've suffered. You've endured too much." Some even openly criticized my parents right beneath the post. Favoritism at this level, how can you even call yourselves fair parents? I read every line, feeling both relief and bitterness. For 7 years, I had lived in silence, letting others believe whatever they wanted about me. Now, for the first time, I had a voice, and it was reaching farther than I ever expected. Of course, not everyone supported me. That very afternoon, my phone lit up again with calls from my parents. I didn't answer, but my father's furious texts flooded in. "You've disgraced us in front of the entire family. You are nothing but a traitor." My mother's messages were soaked in tears. "Isabelle, you're destroying this family. Aren't you ashamed for shaming your own parents in public?" I set the phone down and sighed. They weren't thinking about admitting the truth. All they cared about was saving face. To them, appearances mattered more than fairness to the daughter who had sacrificed her youth. Yes, there were whispers too, people saying it was too much to put family matters on social media. I heard it, but I didn't care. I knew that once the truth had been publicly twisted, the only way to defend myself was to make the truth public as well. I wasn't doing this out of hatred. I was simply exhausted from being cast as the villain in everyone's eyes. By the end of the week, I received a message from an aunt in San Diego, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She wrote, "I'm sorry. I believed what your parents said, but reading your post, I finally see things clearly. You are truly brave. I read her words, my eyes stinging. For the first time in many years, I felt like someone in my family actually saw me, actually heard my voice. Meanwhile, back at home, my parents were spiraling. A relative called to tell me they were going around complaining that I had smeared the family's honor. But what they didn't realize was that the more they stirred up drama, the more people grew curious and came to read my post. And when they did, most found my story far more believable. Many comments openly criticized my parents. That kind of favoritism is unbearable. Isabelle carried everything, while Claire did nothing, yet she got it all. I sat in my apartment, watching the screen light up with hundreds of notifications, and a strange mix of emotions washed over me. There was pain, yes, but more than that, there was relief. I knew the storm wasn't over. My parents and Claire would surely try to retaliate, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I had reclaimed my voice. And that, to me, was worth more than any house or savings account. In the weeks that followed, life slowly settled into a new rhythm, but the consequences of the family storm became clearer than ever. The house I had carried on my back for 7 years now became an unbearable burden for my parents and Claire. I had stopped paying long ago, and after all the arguments, they were forced to take full responsibility exactly as the will had laid out. At first, they tried to hold on. My father scrambled to borrow money from every corner, my mother cut back expenses, and Claire clung to her arrogance, insisting I would soften and come back. But only a few months later, reality hit them hard. The mortgage was too big, their income nowhere near enough to cover both principal and interest. The bank sent warning after warning. Finally, they had no choice but to put the house up for sale. I heard the news from a relative. The house was sold off quickly, at a price far below market value, just to keep up with the debt deadline. The leftover money wasn't enough to sustain the comfortable life my parents had always taken for granted. They had to move into a smaller, humbler apartment, something they had never imagined for themselves. As for Claire, who had grown up swaddled in indulgence, she suddenly lost the pedestal she'd always stood on. Friends mocked her, colleagues whispered behind her back. People called her the spoiled freeloader, the golden child who lived off others yet couldn't even hold onto the house her sister had carried for nearly a decade. Those whispers drove Claire mad. She lashed out with defensive posts online, but the more she wrote, the more ridicule she invited. The reputation of being pampered but useless clung to her like a stain she could never wash away. One day, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Isabelle, this time I'm begging you. Just help us one last time. We've lost the house. Claire is panicking. Your father is broken. Could you lend us money to start over?" I stayed silent for a long time. A small, fragile part of me wanted to say, yes. But then I remembered the 7 years of my youth I had given up, the tears I shed when I had to leave school, the countless times my parents turned their backs and left me to shoulder everything alone. And I remembered the will, the document they themselves had used to legitimize their favoritism. I answered slowly, each word deliberate. The one who inherits must also carry the weight. That's fairness. I'm not your endless wallet anymore. On the other end, I heard my mother's sobs break into hiccups. Then my father's voice cut in, angry and desperate. "You'll regret this, Isabelle. Family is forever." I replied calmly. "Family is where we are respected, not where we are used. You don't regret it." And I hung up. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I only felt relief, as if I had finally set down a burden I had carried too long. It was like an old, moldy door slamming shut, making space for another door, one brighter, one freer. From then on, I stopped keeping track of my family. I poured my energy into my career. At the company, I worked hard, and within a year, I was promoted. My colleagues began to see me as an essential part of the team, not just because of my skills, but because of the steadiness I showed through the storms of my personal life. Beyond work, I started opening my heart to new connections. I realized I was no longer alone. True friends, understanding colleagues, even neighbors, they slowly became my new family. A family not bound by blood, but by respect and mutual trust. There were nights when I gathered with friends around my small apartment table, laughter spilling into the air. No one demanded sacrifice, no one forced responsibility on me as if I had to save anyone. We were simply present with one another, grateful for each other's existence. And I realized then, happiness isn't about being recognized by blood relatives, it's about being seen and accepted by those who truly deserve it. A year later, I returned to school and finally completed the program I had once been forced to abandon. This time, I paid every expense myself, with money earned by my own hard work. When I held that diploma in my hands, nearing 30, I didn't feel behind anyone. On the contrary, I felt proud because I had walked a road so difficult that few could endure. Sometimes, I still heard bits of news about my parents and Claire. Their lives were harder than before, but they never admitted their mistakes. They still told some people that I was ungrateful, but not many believed them anymore. The truth was already clear, and I no longer needed to prove anything. One evening, during a conversation with close friends, someone asked me, "Isabelle, if one day they came back to apologize, would you forgive them?" I smiled. Forgive, maybe. But return to them. I've already set my boundaries. And those boundaries keep me safe. That night, I wrote a few lines in my journal, words that were also the message I wanted to share with anyone who had been hurt the way I had. Family is not where you are born, but where you are respected. Being rejected does not mean you are worthless. And setting boundaries with a toxic family is not selfish, it's how you save yourself. As I closed the notebook, peace settled in my heart. I had lost one family, but I had found another. I had lost 7 years of youth, but I had found myself again. And for me, that was the greatest victory of all. If you are listening to my story and find something familiar in it, perhaps you too carry wounds left by your own family. I know that feeling, the feeling of always being the outsider in your own home, of giving everything and still never being enough to be acknowledged. I used to think that if I tried just a little harder, if I sacrificed one more time, then my parents would finally see me differently. But the truth is, some people will never recognize your worth because they chose to turn away from the beginning. And you do not need to waste your whole life trying to prove yourself to them. I want to leave you with 3 things I've learned paid for with my youth and my tears. First, family is not where you are born, but where you are respected. Cherish those who see you and believe in you, even if they share no blood with you. Second, rejection does not mean you are worthless. Your worth lies in your effort, your perseverance, and the self-respect you hold on to. And finally, setting boundaries with a toxic family is not selfish, it is how you save yourself. You have the right to choose a life where you are not used, not diminished. If my story can tell you anything, it is this. You deserve a family even if it's built from friendship, from colleagues, or simply from the love you give yourself. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.